So that is a little whistle-stop tour, and I want to deliberately keep it fairly short and sweet when we're doing our qualification updates. Now, you can refer to the blog that's got a very comprehensive overview, because I want to make sure we've got plenty of time to then get into the meat of these issues that we're now trying to dissect. And you know, for that, I mean, I'm no expert on some of these issues, so I'm going to be joined by some far more informed and expert speakers to talk about these things. We've already, some of you might be aware, we produced a couple of insight reports a month or two ago around the impact of the pandemic, quite broad-ranging reports. We've actually now produced our third insight report specifically around this topic of remote onboarding. And in fact, I'm joined today by my colleagues, Hazel and Martin, who are actually going to talk us through some of the highlights of this insight report. And then at 2 o'clock, we're going to be dropping a link for that insight report onto our webpage, so you'll be able to actually pick up a full copy of it. I, needless to say, got an early version, so I've been having a good look through it. Very interesting reading. We're also joined today by Felix Mitchell. Very delighted to have an expert speaker. He's from Instant Impact, a talent partnership business specializing in internal recruitment, who's actually been helping his own clients to meet these challenges, remote onboarding during this relatively challenging period. So I thought I might just hand over initially to Hazel, if that's all right, Hazel.
Sure. Thanks, Gareth. So, yeah, I mean, as Gareth alluded to earlier, we are thankfully and really pleased to see that a lot of employers are still pressing ahead with onboarding new intakes this autumn. And our employer survey in May highlighted that, as do ongoing conversations with our employers. And having made the decision to continue as planned, many are now considering how. So how will they actually bring these people into their business? Whilst restrictions are starting to be lifted by the government, there does remain a strong message for people to work from home at the moment and to only use public transport for essential travel. So therefore, the onboarding period of kind of 6 to 8 weeks is likely, at least in part, to take place remotely. So in publishing the report, we wanted to share some ideas and actual practical actions that employers can take to bring new employees into their role and into the culture of the organisation as well, which of course is really important. And when we started looking at this, I think it's worth emphasising before getting into the detail about why adapting the onboarding process is so important. It's not simply a case of just converting your established processes to virtual ones. It is about rethinking your whole approach with the needs of the class of 2020 in mind. And they are an entirely different group to previous intakes that you'll have seen before. They'll be joining their new organisations with entirely different recent experiences of the last 6 months than previous intakes. They're likely to have been living back at home, having reduced social interactions, and they will have all missed out on some really big milestones in life, whether that's sitting final exams, attending graduation ceremonies, and those kinds of big events that actually mark the end of the transition from one period into the next. So instead of feeling excited about their future, they're probably going to be feeling really anxious and apprehensive about starting in their new role. So it's worth keeping that in mind when you're looking at adapting your approach.
Super, thanks, Hazel. I thought maybe at this point I could bring Martin in, actually. I mean, clearly there's a lot to consider for employers regarding this year's cohort. I mean, some of the things that Hazel's mentioned, I mean, something that particularly occurs to me is that for an awful lot of the new intake, they won't have sat a sort of a proper stressful exam for several years, because they may not have done, obviously, GCSEs and A-levels in the kind of last few months. You know, if Martin, if you were going to suggest a couple of areas that you think employers really should kind of focus on in adapting their approach to onboarding, what might you point out?
Right. Well, I think thanks, Hazel. Thanks, Gareth. I guess first of all, I've probably got to so I've got a personal interest here with a daughter who's in year 13, and therefore I'm experiencing this, you know, month by month and week by week with her and her friends. But I think what employers can do is I've come up with 3 things probably that we need to just be aware of. I think there's 3 things just to be really aware of. And the first one is just the expectations of the professionalism that these individuals, whether they're graduates or school leavers, will join with. And by professionalism, I mean about things like, you know, time management. I think things like their communication to people of their peer group or people who might be more senior in an organisation. I mean about things like their dress code and what they expect now, having been just out of that situation for the last, well, what would be 6 months at least. And I think when you look at graduates, many universities had sort of strikes going on in the first half of the term before, in January and February. So for a lot of people, they might not have been in a situation for 7 or 8 months before they actually join your firm. So I think just an awareness of that professionalism that you need and the culture that you want to build in individuals is going to be a key one. I think that's the first one. The second one, I think, relates back to what Gareth has mentioned. I'm going to widen it around just from exams, but to overcoming fears, overcoming concerns. I think, this is a group that, one, they're going to be well aware that if they mess up in your organisation, getting another job is going to be really difficult. All right. So number one, they've already got expectations of parents, of friends, of their own that is heightened. They want to get it right. There's also a fear around the exams, no doubt about it. These are going to be the toughest exams these individuals will ever have taken, and they've come in without that level of focus on high stakes exams and the revision that they need to do that. So being cognizant of that is really important. I think there's going to be concerns about how they make friends, how they build networks. And I think, don't forget, how do they do that in a situation where they won't have the sort of the normal interactions that we might have? So there's overcoming those fears. I think there's a professionalization of them. And I think the last one is just, and this is probably me more with my daughter looking at her friends, but is a work ethic. It's just I've got a concern about the work ethic. And just so many of this group have been furloughed or haven't got work at the moment, that just getting them back into understanding of what it means to take responsibility for something, to not just stop and go and it's somebody else's problem, that it's not all fun, that you might have to go through some hard work. I think this group is going to be very different. And I guess those three things are sort of what, Gareth, for me, I think would be, I want every employer to take away.
Brilliant, thanks, Martin. And actually, I'm not sure it's just the new intake. They're going to need to have a little bit of, recalibration on dress code, for instance. I haven't worked for about 14 weeks. And even things like time management, I'm just getting so used to now. I don't worry about a meeting until about 3 minutes before it's about to happen, rather than thinking about it 3 hours before, because I've got to travel to it. But it's interesting what you're saying there around sort of building networks, because I know, talking to a couple of employers that I work with, that one of their concerns, particularly for the new intakes, is around that cohort feel, that cohort mentality of them being a group who've come into a new employer together. And actually what they were saying is that because often when they come into the workplace, they might be going to different clients, they maybe rarely cross paths in the office. And the training manager one, for instance, she was saying she actually relies on their time at First Intuition in the classroom. That's part of their bonding as a cohort, as a year, which obviously may not happen in the same way, at least not in the first few months. So I know we're working very hard to kind of think about different ways, whether it's virtually, that we can help create that more cohort mindset, or possibly even, I know one of my colleagues, Ben, is, he's been invited to a virtual kind of cocktail mixer with the new intake in the garden of one of the clients that we work with, because that's one way to just get them together. Hazel, can I turn back to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, lots of kind of ideas there about how we might approach, just looking at how different this group is and what they need, and they do have incredibly different needs. To go into some of the more practical actions that employers can take to adapt their approach, the report provides some ideas on steps that can be taken in 5 key areas. And we don't have time to go through them all now, but as Gareth said, you'll all be able to access our reports online later this afternoon. But just looking at step 1 there as an example. So there's loads of things that new employees could be doing before they even start with you, such as registering early with their professional body and checking out the resources available to them as a student there. Completing some basic online training, whether that's provided by yourselves and the training provider, or even linking up with a buddy or a mentor within the organisation as well. And that again is really critical this year. It's so important every year, but I think having a kind of contact within the firm or within the organisation before they even start means that they can start having those conversations and building those networks early on.
And can I just ask there, Hazel, just taking the delivery of onboarding content and training as another kind of point to consider on a framework like this, what can employers be doing here to adapt what they would normally do?
Yeah, I think we definitely advise employers to make sessions as interactive as possible. So do resist the temptation to make every session a broadcast supported by a slide deck. That might be appropriate for some things, but where it can be avoided, do avoid it. You can enhance interactivity in simple ways by building in Q&A sessions every 15 to 20 minutes. You could set activities for groups to go away and undertake together and then come back and present to the rest of the intake in another session or to other colleagues within the firm. You could even create quite competitive fun activities such as virtual treasure hunts to establish the new intake as a bit more of a peer group. But I would say the other things, don't feel like you have to fill every moment of their time with an online session as well. We've all experienced Zoom fatigue, and I think signposting your new intake to resources and activities that they can complete offline, as well as the live sessions that they might attend, will really complement what they're doing and will give them a bit of a break too. Another thing that we're seeing some clients do is creating short recordings, and we're supporting some of those recordings as well for very specific content that might not apply to everybody. So if you're asking everybody to attend a live session, make sure that what you're covering does apply to everybody, and then any specific content relating to study pathways or qualifications could actually be separated out, and people can then read through that specific information in their own time rather than zoning out of a live session because they feel it doesn't apply to them.
Cool. And I know, I mean, it's obviously something that we've had to become absolute experts at in the last 3 months ourselves, is the kind of virtual delivery of training. We were already doing it, obviously, Hazel. I mean, we've got an awful lot of purely online students, but it's something that we're going to be looking at as part of this think tank series in a couple of months' time. We've got a couple of sessions looking at delivering internal training. I know a few employers are a bit concerned about that aspect of things. So got a few of our colleagues who are kind of looking into what best practice on that would be.
Yeah, I think it's important to understand all the tools that are available and make sure you do apply them. And I know I think Felix has got some ideas later on as well to kind of put forward. So it is worth making sure that any technology that you integrate into the process is also right for what you're trying to get across. And then I think just looking at the kind of HR considerations as well, I think the practical and the personal aspects are really important. So if you take just working from home as an example, it's not just can they work from home, but how do they feel about it? A lot of them might have studied informally at home before, but it's unlikely that they would have had a formal structured working environment in their home environment. And some of them might have even been planning to relocate during the summer to be closer to their new office location, had those plans delayed, or they might have other concerns that you can help with regarding that kind of working from home environment. And the access to IT is really critical. So any IT department must ensure that trainees receive their equipment and it's fully set up for day one, because that will impact their ability to engage at all, and they might feel really out on a limb there if they don't have access to the right tools to do their job and to engage with the onboarding activities. It's also worth considering when you're looking at things like IT setup, not just the requirements of the organisation, but things like the remote invigilation requirements of some professional bodies, if your trainees are likely to use that approach, and also the software used by training providers such as First Intuition to actually deliver learning too. So it's worth getting all of those things nailed down before the laptops go out to make sure that it's as smooth and as slick as possible. And the final thing on there is the kind of paperwork requirements as well. A lot of HR departments do traditionally ask to see physical copies of passports, things like that. So again, how can those processes be adapted to kind of take account of the remote way in which they're being onboarded?
Smashing, thank you. Well, actually, Martin, if I can draw you back in again, actually, I mean, Hazel's covered a few of the practical things to consider from an HR perspective. Do you have any views on how employers can make the experience kind of more personal for the new intake?
I guess it flows on a bit from what I was saying before, Gareth. You know, I guess number one is trying to remember, and I know for a lot of organisations this does become, there's a set of processes to it, but try to remember that this is about people. So the fundamental thing here is we're dealing with people, and I think empathy. I guess a bit here we could all do is just appreciate it is going to be different. This is going to be a different onboarding process to 2019. That if you have a buddy system and you normally give a buddy from the 2019 intake to the 2020 intake, their experience is going to be complete, chalk and cheese to the experience these guys have had. And so they need to empathise with that. They need to be aware of that rather than saying, oh, you've missed out on a great XYZ. Okay, so I think there's just that empathy level is really important. I was thinking one of the things that, you know, I'd be really keen to advise we do is try and get a sort of get every one of your new trainees to do a sort of last 6 months updated, last 6 months CV. What have you been doing the last 6 months? All right, and that would just, don't worry about what was on it before. You've got the job with us, but just tell us what you've been doing, and you'll get an insight into their life. Have they been living at home? They've been living with friends? Have they had lots of family issues, been furloughed? You'd get a lot of rich information that would make you more able to deal with that individual on a personal basis than sort of just as a member of an intake. And I think it's going to be really important for, you know, to try and ensure that we retain these individuals in the first sort of 6 to 8 weeks of their working experience, that we do empathise and understand them as best as possible. And it is, and that's not just you on the call here, but that's everyone who interacts with this intake, that they are going through a different experience to normal.
Actually, you know, as you're saying that, I'm immediately thinking, right, well, what can we as a training provider actually do with that as well? So I think, Hazel, you've got a few thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, you know, delivering programs that provide structure and feedback is the core of what we do. So for employers that don't have an internal training program, they could consider how learning provided by the training provider could be front loaded to kind of support and provide this structure in the first few weeks if that's lacking potentially internally. But also be realistic. You know, again, we've covered a lot about how this group are different and that they haven't had that kind of structured environment, whether that's learning through formal training or through experience at all in the last 6 months. So it will take them some time to get back into the swing of learning. So by working with the training provider to build those kind of, whether it's the pre-onboarding information packs, whether it's some of the activities that can be integrated into that first 6 to 8 week period, and bringing forward some of the more structured training, that alongside considering whether or not you want to allocate some more days of study for this intake alongside their kind of virtual classroom courses, that might help with their overall development and well-being as well.
Fantastic, thank you. Well, that's been a kind of bit of an overview of some of the areas that the Insight report covers. It's actually got loads and loads of kind of detail and practical suggestions around each of the areas that Hazel's been highlighting there. So after this session, it is going to go live on our website, and we will send out a link to that to everyone registered for the forum. I'd be very interested in any feedback on, you know, the points in there. If any of you have got any kind of experiences or ideas of your own, you know, it'll be always interesting to hear. But we're now going to hand over, and actually maybe just I'll take advantage of the slight lull between Hazel and Felix just to pick up on, I can see there's a question in the chat box from Nicola just around ACCA remote exams and what students can do. I'm afraid, Nicola, you can appreciate we have zero control whatsoever over what goes on in the exam venues or what Pearson VUE do or don't allow. I mean, I can raise it with the ACCA, but unfortunately, the rules is rules, as they say. So you just need to make sure that students are aware of the rules that they have to comply with. But that's given a little opportunity there for Felix to set up his slide deck. So really delighted to be joined by Felix, who's going to share some of his insights from the experience he's had supporting employers literally in the last few weeks. So Felix, if I can hand over to you, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Gareth, and thanks Hazel and Martin for a really interesting report there. I've got to say, I think the change in format is fantastic. I think I speak for as a new member of your community, but it's so great that you're sharing your insights, I guess, beyond the training provision. I think really interesting so far. So thank you very much for making me a part of this. So I suppose I should start by introducing myself. So for those of you who don't know Instant Impact, that's pretty much all there is to me. I'm one of the founding directors of the business, but we're a talent partnership, as Gareth mentioned before, and that means that we specialize in building and running high-performing internal recruitment functions for our clients. So that's providing the experience needed, the support, the technology, and the team that provides the quality, speed, and cost of hire that our clients want. And as Gareth mentioned before, during lockdown, several of our clients have been hiring at volume, and we've been working really closely with them to help them quickly shift the recruitment and onboarding practices that work so well in person and get them working online. in a sort of seamless way in a digital world. So for my part of the webinar today, I'm going to follow a pretty similar structure to Hazel's presentation, but I'm going to deep dive into some of the practical elements around pre-boarding and onboarding, and drawing predominantly from our experience working with those accounts. And as with the other guys, please do ask any questions as we go. So if this works, yeah, I'm going to start with pre-boarding. It's something that's often forgotten about, and I'm really happy to see some advice from First Intuition there around how to communicate with your hires between offer accepted and actually starting in the role. We find that generally this goes as one of HR's most unloved processes. The recruitment team feel their job's done once the offer's accepted, and the HR team often thinks that their job starts on day one. But I've got to say that with the economy as it is today, it's never been as important to get this right. So just to put this into context, and to bring on this sort of empathy that that Martin was talking about before, you got to think, put yourselves in the shoes of these young people. So a report released last week from the Learning and Work Institute found that the UK could be on track to exceed 4 million unemployed, which is a higher unemployment rate at any point since the Great Depression. It's a pretty scary environment to be in, and it's meant that candidates have become more risk averse, and they're tending to play it safe. And honestly, I can't blame them. We've all heard horror stories of friends and colleagues who've handed in their notice only to have a job offer rescinded. And it's doubly true for those who are looking for their first jobs, even if they have a job offer already secured. So 25% of companies around the UK have announced that they expect to reduce their graduate and apprenticeship intake this year as a result of COVID. And a lot of those companies had already made offers, already sent out contracts, and a lot of those have cancelled their early career program altogether. It may not be in your industry, but those are the stories, the horror stories that are circulating around. So really be aware of that when talking to your candidates. And it's just so important to keep talking to candidates and keeping them feeling confident and engaged, so that they actually convert into joining your company and your training program at the end of the day, which of course is the plan. Look, the good news here is that pre-boarding, this has always been remote, so it's just sticking to the fundamentals. One big fundamental is that communication's key. Do it to build trust in your company. Make sure that you tell them how well you're doing, if you're doing well, or that you're going to survive this if that's where your company is. Just be completely transparent, and don't think that there's any such thing as over communication. Jump on the phone as much as you can. And I really like that idea around pre-joining training. Anything you can send them there, any of those videos that Hazel mentioned before, so valuable. Also, I mean, people are sitting at home and pretty bored. So from what we've seen, people absolutely soak up those opportunities to get more involved. And I just want to say, if you under communicate, there really is a risk of reneged offers if they're offered something that starts sooner by another company or something like that. So just watch out on that. A really big lesson that we learned quite early on in lockdown, and this is with a company of ours in a different sector. It's Octopus Energy, who are a challenger energy supplier. Over this whole period, they've been hiring about 15 people in their early career every month during lockdown. What we learned really early on is that you don't need to know all the answers. I think Gareth was just telling us earlier how quickly the examining bodies are changing the story there. The same is true everywhere. We're hearing one thing from the government, one thing from the newspapers, one thing from the training providers. As long as you've hired the right people, they're the right culture fit, they should be understanding, as long as you take care to communicate and you're really transparent with them. So if you do that right, these offers that you've made are more likely than ever to turn into hires, which takes me nicely onto onboarding itself. Now, by virtue of joining this webinar, I don't think I really need to hammer home the importance of getting onboarding right, but I think it is nice to underline it just with this stat from Josh Bursin over at Deloitte. So 22% of employees leave in their first 45 days, and it's a much higher number that decide to leave at some point in their first 45 days. So I just wanted to bring this up because to underline the importance of getting it right, and to also make sure that it's clear what the cost of the wrong hire is. So sorry, of making a rehire is. You've got to retrain, rehire, get the management costs, the opportunity costs. So it's really worth doing well. And I think, as the First Intuition report mentions, when you download it, your new trainees and hires will really appreciate a warm onboarding process, and now more than any before. But I've got to say, onboarding is going to change more as an HR process, almost more than any other, by virtue of being remote. So if I could leave you with one piece of advice here, it's take the time now to get it right, even if it's not relevant until September. It's going to be a really big job. So there's all of these logistics to think about, social aspects, making them feel like part of the team. So I'd really recommend designating someone to oversee this operation, someone detail oriented. Doesn't need to be someone too senior, but mistakes here could lead to days of productivity lost, and also an increased chance of attrition, as you can see. So I'm going to go through the rest of my time just going through some practical tips here. So I think no better is it illustrated than is the complexity of this illustrated than a normally simple task, one that actually Hazel mentioned before, of getting the laptop to someone with the right software installed. It's no longer a case of just digging out a spare laptop or a spare computer from the IT department. Procurement or whoever's doing it has to purchase the computers, get them delivered to the IT manager's personal house, get them configured, and then get the IT department to courier that to your new starter. Even something so simple just has so many additional steps, and multiply that by everything that you need to do in onboarding. So checklists are your friends. Create a day-to-day plan starting from your start date, and build in room for delays, build in room for mistakes. And this is definitely a case of fail to plan, plan to fail. And there's going to be a lot of work, so make sure that if one department's getting their onboarding process right, make sure they share it with other ones, and make sure that best practice goes as far as it can, so you've not got two departments doing the identical thing. And this is the same for training as well. The first thing I want to say here, though, is not to succumb to the temptation to reinvent the wheel here, if you don't have to. If you've got a training schedule that works, or even better, a fantastic training provider like First Intuition, try and keep those principles the same, just move it online. But we've seen some really great things that some of our clients and some of our community have been doing to take advantage of doing things remotely. So for example, Hazel mentioned recording videos. You can also record all of your training sessions so that your new hires can watch them back. You can also build up a training library, and any future hires, maybe in next year's cohort, can do some of those basic training sessions by watching pre-recorded training. And here's an idea for the more adventurous of you, which is that if you're doing a really interesting topic, you can actually share that online for free and boost your employer brand. You might want to share it with people still at school, people still at university, to get them interested in the world of the wonderful world of accounting, and get your brand front and center. This is also the world of remote training is a great opportunity to get more of the team involved in doing shorter segments of training. It's pretty easy to work those short training sessions into busy executive schedules, and it can be a great opportunity for your trainees to get exposure to your managing partner or partner in charge of different areas of your business. So that's in just a half-hour training session. So that's a great way to get them involved in the culture. But in terms of shortcomings, which of course there are, it's much harder to see when new joiners are at a loose end. So I really advise providing new hires with resources to look at and tasks to do in between modules, in between sessions, and make it clear that they need to shout out if they find themselves at a loose end as well. The other area that we get asked about quite a lot is on shadowing. Many of our clients actually rely pretty heavily on workplace shadowing, especially in the first couple of weeks. So what we've put together is a few tips that you can use to replicate this in a remote world. So keep a video chat open between new hires and their buddies. I think Hazel mentioned the power of a buddy system before, but having a video channel open between them all the time can work really well. Allows them to ask questions off the cuff, just as if they're sitting right next to them. They can use screen sharing, shared documents, so that they observe how the rest of the team works. And then also, you can also encourage the whole company to invite your trainees to join meetings. Having an extra icon on your Teams or Zoom or whatever you use is actually much less intrusive on the video meeting than having another person in the room for a face-to-face meeting. So do take advantage of that. And where that's not possible, do what we're doing on here, record the meetings, record the calls, record the video chats with the permission, as Gareth did correctly at the beginning of this session as well. But by being really thoughtful and structured with your training, it's really possible to provide new hires with a great impression of your business from day one, and also make sure that they get up to speed just as quickly as if you were doing it in person. So just a couple more slides, and a really important element here, which is to focus on the social element, which couldn't be more important than with your early careers hires. A lot of people make friends for life on their programs, which sounds flippant, but it actually can be a really big reason for people to stay in a job, especially if they're going through a tough month or couple of months. It just carries them on through, and this becomes a really key component to retention, and then also workplace happiness as well. So how do you replicate this remotely? I mean, hopefully these things are easing, and you can meet in people's gardens, but even where you can't, some best practice that we've seen over lockdown includes really making the most out of the buddy system and building in social elements to that. So coffees, lunches, drinks over video chat. It's not as good as face-to-face, but it's the best that we can do. And then also remote events for the entire team. So quizzes, wine tastings, company bake-off, yoga, gym classes. There's a lot of examples around there as well. And then I'd just like to say, the more opportunity there is to spend non-work time with the team, the better. So that's certainly getting easier, as I said before, but try and mix that in as much as you can, and aim to have your new joiners as excited, well, your 2020 intake as excited to come back to work as your 2019 intake is as well. A really great way of going about that is with some small touches. So a little bit of thought goes a long way. So Octopus Energy, for example, I mentioned them before. We've been working with them, and they provide a personalized package to everyone before starting. So it's everything they need to work. So the laptop and all of that, practical work, but then also some surprises as well. A t-shirt, I think they get them a cuddly toy. We work with another, because they're an octopus and they've got an animal logo, so that works quite well. And then also, so we work with some other companies who send a Deliveroo and a bottle of wine instead of, because normally they take a new hire out for dinner. So that works really well. The more company stationery and clothing they can have around the company, the more, and it sounds silly, but it does go a very long way. So that's really it from me. I do want to quickly say, if anyone wants a deeper dive into this and to explore it in a bit more detail, we're going to be offering free workshops throughout July to help companies better understand and prepare for a remote workplace. So anyone on today's webinar can book on to one of these for free. I think my colleague Frankie is going to circulate a link if it works. But if you're interested, just sign up. We'll be really happy to help out there. And I mentioned a few softwares before, a few different software before, and here are some on here. So some video, everyone's seen Zoom and Hangouts for the video interviews, but there's going to be some really helpful elements like Dashlane and LastPass for password management, Trello, and what's it called, Miro as well for online collaboration. There's loads of this stuff. If anyone wants any advice on it, just add me on LinkedIn or send me an email. I'd be really happy to share all of that. Well, that's it from me. Thanks again for letting me ramble on.
I don't think that was rambling at all, actually. That was very interesting, Felix. Thank you very much for that. And even though that last slide, I mean, we use Slack an awful lot for internal conversation. It's kind of taking over for me, email, and we even have Slack channels just for social, you know, for more fun stuff and asking each other daft questions. You know, what you're talking about in terms of pre-boarding, you know, I just think that's so crucial these days. You know, even things like social dues, I mean, you know, it's different times, but I know when we have somebody who's going to join us in a January, we'll tend to invite them to the Christmas do. And just that makes such a massive impact that they're being invited to a Christmas do before they're even a member of staff. And I'm sure all of us are involved in online pub quizzes and whatever, music appreciation. I've got some colleagues who have an online craft club. you know, invite your pre-hires to those. You know, they can join and socialise with some of their soon-to-be colleagues, you know, before they even start. I think, you know, what you were saying about that gap between when recruitment hand over the baton and HR pick it up, there's often that kind of couple of months gap that really needs filling. And another piece of advice actually that somebody gave to me a week or so ago was that in the onboarding process, try to make the new hires contribute as well as consume, was the phrase they use, contribute as well as consume. So, you know, if they've worked elsewhere, get them to talk about what onboarding happened at the other place. You know, there may be some good ideas. The other good tip I thought was really genius was if you've got a group onboarding, you know, a cohort of 10 new starters, pair them up, get them to go and research some aspect of the company, like the management team or how to claim expenses, and then get them to deliver to the rest of the new intake on what they found out. So they're actually helping each other to learn new stuff. I thought that was a really clever little idea. You know, I'd probably have an actual member of staff there just to check they're not saying anything that's completely wrong. But I thought that was a nice little idea. But as you said, I mean, it's planning, and I think it's planning for those things that don't happen so often and so readily in a virtual environment. You know, there's chance interactions between a new hire and one of the partners or one of the directors who may just run into each other in the kitchen in normal times and have a chat over tea. That's not going to happen unless you plan for it to happen. So making sure there is that, I mean, as you said, that access to senior staff, maybe some form of shadowing, which can just as easily happen remotely if it's planned and if it's kind of put into people's diaries. So no, fantastic. Some really interesting ideas there. Can I just ask you one question actually, Felix, just while we've got you and while we've got your experience here? I mean, aside from onboarding, kind of what sort of other areas do you think COVID and remote working has changed and will change for the future?
Oh, great question. I think there is one topic that we're working on and getting asked about more than any other right now. It's part to do with COVID. It's also part to do with the Black Lives Matters protests that are going on around the world, and it's on how companies can become more inclusive and become more diverse. I think that the story of the next couple of years is going to be a shifting of emphasis on companies from just not doing anything wrong to actually making sure that they're actively influencing their diversity breakdown and how they're supporting their minority employees. I think, I mean, for example, COVID affects, it's more, Black people are 4 times more likely to die of COVID than white people in this country. And it's going to really sort of highlight some of the inequalities in the UK, in the world. And it's also, I think, this sort of feeling of national response to something is also going to make us feel like we can do something about it. So next on the checklist for companies should definitely be, or top of the checklist should really be, how they're going to become a more diverse, more inclusive place for people to work.
Yeah, and I mean, I get the impression, you know, in recent years that actually candidates, they are much more interested in diversity in the employers that they're looking at. You know, they're interviewing the employer as much as the employer is interviewing them around diversity. Would be a very good example. I guess sustainability would be another sort of issue that will be very, you know, important
Absolutely.
to candidates, and I guess would also help perhaps with that statistic you gave, really powerful statistic around the number of new hires that leave very quickly, and actually to generate much faster you know, staff loyalty, I guess, to the organization.
Absolutely. A sense of pride leads to a real sense of belonging as well. Yeah, I completely agree with that.
Well, a sense of pride and a sense of purpose. I mean, that's the thing I think as well, as organizations having a genuine purpose. It isn't just about making money. You know, a purpose to the organization that will be really appealing to those candidates coming in. No, fantastic. I don't know whether Hazel or Martin, have you got any last thoughts before we start wrapping up?
I mean, for me, I think it's all been covered. I mean, I'm just very keen to hear if anyone else has got any other thoughts or questions, I guess, just from the wider piece in the chat, or I know there's going to be some information that gets shared afterwards, and Felix is very kindly given some access and links to some further workshops. But Yeah, nothing more to add, Gareth, to what's been said already. It's been really, really interesting, though.
Fantastic, thanks, Martin. Hazel, any final thoughts from you?
I think it's, yeah, just don't put it off. I think it's the key thing. You know, do plan to at least have a significant amount of the onboarding process need to be delivered virtually, and even just to ensure that you are being inclusive to those who can't attend because of their own personal circumstances, even if we can actually open up more widely but come September. So it is really important, and hopefully we've given everybody some ideas as to how they can put that into practice.
Fantastic, thank you. And actually, I'm going to drop my email address into the chat box. I mean, in terms of Martin there saying, you know, if any of you got any questions, any points, do send them in, because next Friday we are going to be sticking with this topic. I think it is a very hot topic for a lot of employers. So we are going to be joined next week by Will Dempsey, who is the Global Talent Acquisition Lead for AstraZeneca. Now, I actually visited him in one of his offices last year, and he was telling me that he was onboarding over 100 new staff a week. And that hasn't slowed down in the last 3 months. So he's had to turn himself into an overnight remote onboarding expert. In fact, he's even generated what he calls his recruiting during COVID toolkit, which I'm hoping he might share a version with us next week. And we're also going to be joined by the awarding bodies. I've invited ICAEW, AAT, CIMA, ACCA to actually give us their top tips and best practice on remote onboarding that they can help employers with as well. So hopefully next Friday will be just as interesting. But if any of you want to send any questions, any thoughts to me in the intervening week, I can perhaps try and incorporate them into next Friday's session. And well, I would just like to thank, you know, Felix for his expertise. That's been really fascinating. Thank you very much for joining us. I'll thank Martin and Hazel as well for joining us, my colleagues from First Intuition. Just a couple of things I was going to point out before we finish off, another couple of things that are worth being aware of. So, you know, in light of this idea of youngsters looking at their careers, we're running a summer school, which I'm hoping Shelley might drop a link to our summer school. We would normally do them in centre for 16, 17, 18-year-olds, GCSE A-level candidates to come in, just find out a bit about accountancy. We've decided to do it online, and we had 360 youngsters register for it. In the first session that was last Tuesday, we had 200 attend the live session. It is running every Tuesday throughout the summer, so if you have any relatives, any colleagues with relatives that might be interesting to, please share the link with them. It's really fascinating actually to see the engagement they have with that. And the other thing that we're just launching this next week is we're running, because we are conscious that a lot of individuals are obviously working at home, they're working remotely. That does create a different pressure, it requires different skills. So we've put together a I've got to see a point from Martin there. We've put together a series of what we're calling mini skills sessions. They're 1 hour lunchtime on a Thursday, covering things like working remotely, covering things like confidence, covering things like resilience and prioritization. So Shelley, I think, has dropped a link for that as well. So if any of your colleagues would value those, and they don't have to be accountants at all, they're not just focused on accountancy. If any of your colleagues working remotely would value these 1 hour free, anyone can access sessions. There's a link there for people to book on as well. So hopefully that will be useful for some of your colleagues, for some of your trainees, particularly in different parts of the business. But apart from that, I just want to thank everyone for attending, thank our speakers again. It'd be useful if anyone just wants to pop any comments in the chat box about whether this has been useful, because it is very much the thread we're taking for the coming few weeks. But apart from that, thank you very much. Enjoy your afternoons, enjoy your weekends, and let's hope it's a nice sunny one. And I will see you perhaps next Friday.
Thanks, Gareth. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you,
Thank you, Felix.
Really,
see you soon.
Thanks, everyone.